up. We'll see if they join us. But I'd like to start by just welcoming you all and thanking you for joining us this morning. I'm Peter Enrich. I'm the chair of Progressive Dems of Massachusetts. And I'm just going to say a few quick words of introduction and then turn it over to the wonderful panel that we have today. PDM has been around for something over 20 years now, working to hold the Democratic Party and the Commonwealth to the progressive ideals that we often talk about by both electing progressive leaders and by pursuing specific issues. And in the last several years, we've been doing forums like this one on a range of issues that are important and that we want to focus people's attention on. And a bunch of those have been about the dysfunction of the legislature. And so this is the next in that series. I should also mention at this point, the ballot initiative we're going to be discussing today to reform the stipend system is a primary focus for PDM this year. We're also actively supporting one other ballot question, which is the rent stabilization initiative. And we're going to be holding our forum in October focused on that. Tentatively scheduled for Friday, October 10th. Keep an eye out for announcements about it. That's another one that we think is really important to move forward and that we're going to be actively supporting. Before we get started, just one quick thing about process. If you have questions that you'd like the panel to address, please feel free to put those in the chat and we will do our best to cover them to the extent time permits. We found that it's distracting for people to use the chat to debate, to discuss, to argue with what's being said by the panel. And we ask you to refrain from doing that and use it primarily for questions that you'd like the panel to be addressing. So before we start, let me just a few words about PDM's history on the issues of legislative reform. We, in our 20-some years of existence, have tackled a wide range of issues, many of which have required legislative action, and have grown increasingly frustrated with the difficulty of getting the legislature to act in responsive or transparent ways. And so about 5 years ago, we decided we really were going to take on the issue of what's wrong with the Massachusetts legislature. We convened one of our working groups, which is our standard way of tackling issues, and it spent a couple of years digging deeply into the issues of what was wrong with the legislature, the many ways in which it is a true outlier among other state legislatures. That resulted, the main product of it was a report, Democracy in Decline, that has become a sort of a centerpiece for the movement for legislative reform. And it's up on our website. Encourage you to look at it if you haven't. We're working on an update of it, which we hope to be releasing in the next month or so. So keep an eye out for that. When we had finished the work of that working group, we realized that we weren't going to solve this problem alone. It's a huge challenge to tackle. And so we worked with some other groups, including Act on Mass, to form a coalition, the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature, to really try and build broad, across the aisle support for important reforms. Kroll has been in place for several years now, and we've pursued legislation, we've pursued candidate endorsements. We haven't gotten as far as we'd like to get, and so we have decided that the next step has got to be to go to the ballot and circumvent the legislature and try and make reforms there. And that's what brings us here today. So with that said, let me introduce the moderator for today's forum, who will introduce the panelists and kick things off. we're delighted to have Scotia Hilla step in as moderator for today's forum. As many of you know, Scotia is the executive director of Act on Mass. In fact, she said she's celebrating her 1-year anniversary in that role. And she has been just a wonderful partner. Act on Mass has been a wonderful partner even before Scotia stepped in, but she has just been a great ally, and working with her has been wonderful. And Act On has been a tremendous ally. Scotia has a graduate degree in climate policy. She worked for Act on Mass initially as a volunteer as part of the People's House campaign that a number of us were involved with back in 2020 rather, and then stepped in a year ago as the executive director. The one other thing that should be said about Scotia, I'm sure most of you know about it. If you don't read her Saturday Scoop that comes out every Saturday, you're missing out some of the best coverage of what goes on Beacon Hill, and I strongly recommend you to start reading it. It's a pleasure to read and full of useful information. So we are delighted to have Scotia here to moderate. I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you, Peter. So grateful to be with you all today, and thank you for having us. Thank you for hosting this important conversation. So I think Peter did a great job of introducing me, but I'll say just a little bit more about who we are as Act on Mass. So Act on Mass is a nonprofit. We were founded in 2018 by a group of progressive activists to bring attention to the problems in our legislature. We have a general goal of shifting political power in Massachusetts from the top to the grassroots and ensuring that our legislators work for us, not for corporate interests, high-paid lobbyists. So we work as a watchdog organization. We track key bills through the legislature. We follow the ins and outs of the legislative process and try to make that information accessible for the public. We keep people informed about what's going on through our Saturday Scoop, like Peter mentioned. Thank you for the compliment. And we also advocate for common sense rules reforms and transparency-based legislation. And very recently, ballot question. So Act on Mass has been interested in stipend reform for several years now. When we talk about what's wrong with our legislature, we tend to break it down into two different categories: the lack of transparency and the tremendous concentration of power and leadership. And we really see that as a vicious cycle in which the lack of transparency provides cover for the fact that our own rank and file reps are completely blocked from participation in the process. So my predecessor, Aaron Leahy, participated in the drafting of the Democracy in Decline report, as Peter mentioned. I was happy to take on the helm when I joined. And just a quick anecdote, when I first started with Act on Mass, I'd been reading some of the coverage of the stipend issue in the Boston Globe, and I pitched my predecessors on, I really think that we should do stipend reform stuff, thinking that it was going to be a hard sell. And they were like, oh, we didn't tell you about what we're doing with Kroll? Like, we're already working on that. So I was delighted to get to join into an already active effort, and have very much appreciated the allyship of many of the folks on this call today. So without further ado, I have been told I should clarify some of the acronyms that we're going to be talking about today. So PDM obviously refers to Progressive Dems of Mass. I will try to just call Act on Mass, but sometimes we are called AOM. Then you have Kroll, which is the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature, which is the kind of brain trust group that's been working on building these reforms over the years and producing great research about it. And then the now newly anointed ballot committee is called LEAP, which stands for the Legislative Effectiveness and Accountability Project. So just to clarify, in case we start throwing a lot of acronyms around there. With that in mind, I'm so delighted to introduce our panelists today. We have Jonathan Hecht and Brian Muldoon to talk about this issue of stipend reform. I'm going to introduce their bios, and then I'll just hand it over to Jonathan and Brian to give us a quick introduction to the issue. So Jonathan Hecht is a former state representative. He served from 2009 to 2021, and city councilor previously from Watertown. Previously, he worked at a New York law firm as a program officer for the Ford Foundation in Human Rights and Governance in Beijing, taught East Asian law at Harvard Law School, and co-founded the China Law Center at Yale Law School. John is on the steering committee of the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature and the leadership team of Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts. And we also have Brian Muldoon joining us today. Brian Muldoon is a Boston native who's amassed 2 decades of experience in the political, government, and nonprofit sectors. Brian has served as vice president at Ericsson Communication Group since 2020, serving dozens of candidates, nonprofits, and ballot questions. Brian began his career at the Massachusetts Democratic Party, starting as field and data director and ultimately serving as executive director in 2013. Since leaving the party, he held a senior staff position on the Martha Coakley gubernatorial campaign and has consulted for numerous local, statewide, and federal Democratic candidates. Brian holds a JD from Suffolk Law School and a BA in political science from UMass Boston. So we're so happy to have our panelists here today. I'm going to pass it off to Jonathan to give us a quick intro to the stipend issue.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Scotia. Thank you, PDM, for holding this forum. And again, thank you, everybody, for being part of this. This is a really exciting moment for those of us who have long wanted to see our state legislature operate more transparently, more democratically, more effectively. Peter and Scotia have just described the history of this effort, which of course goes back much further. People like Jay Kaufman, who's on this call, was pushing for reform from within the legislature decades ago now. I'm sorry to say, Jay. But now, with this ballot campaign, I think we really have a great opportunity to make those reforms happen. I'm not going to dwell, and I don't think there's much need, at least in this company, to dwell much on why we need legislative reform in Massachusetts. I think many of you have probably been in attendance at our past forums here at PDM or elsewhere that have addressed the legislator's dysfunction, the overconcentration of power, the lawmaking behind closed doors, the failure to advance bills that would bring real benefits to people in Massachusetts with no explanation why. And there's already been mention made of some of the analyses that are available of the legislature's dysfunctions. I think John Lippett just put into the chat the link to the Democracy in Decline paper that PDM and then Kroll have worked on and have been using to sort of spread the word about what's wrong in the legislature with those who aren't following it. I also do really recommend, if you haven't seen it, that you go and look at the State Secrets series of articles that the Globe's politics reporters have produced over the last year and a half, which is a terrific set of insights into a whole host of different ways in which the legislature is dysfunctional. So we know what the problems are, and how do we fix them? That's what I think we all really care about at this point. And what we've chosen to do with this ballot campaign is to focus on the way that legislators get paid, and specifically on the legislative stipends as the way to drive reform for a more open, a more responsive, a truly democratic legislature. I again expect that many of you know about the stipend system, but let me just give you a few sort of up-to-date essentials. The Senate president, the Speaker of the House, and the minority party leaders in Massachusetts currently give out $5.4 million a year to legislators that they appoint to leadership and committee chair positions. Unlike in other states and in Congress, where legislative stipends are few in number and small relative to legislators' base salary, stipends in Massachusetts have become pervasive. They're more than twice the number of stipends than there were even just 30 years ago, and also very large. They range from $8,000 to nearly $100,000 a year. And that's relative to a base salary of $82,000 a year. And as a result, they are a very powerful tool of top-down control by tying legislators' financial well-being to their deference to leadership's wishes. So as you can see, I mean, stipends, they create basically a conflict of interest for legislators between their duty to represent their constituents and their relationship to legislative leaders who have control over their pay. Legislators in Massachusetts they're financially dependent on leadership, and that dependency leads to deference. They wait to be told what to do because acting independently, acting openly, risks losing significant income. And the chairs of committees, who are the ones who, along with leadership, are getting the larger stipends, they're essentially being rewarded for keeping the work on bills behind closed doors, because that's where leadership, those at the very top, can shape and control them. So our goal in reforming the stipends is to open up and to democratize the legislature by reducing that dependence, reducing legislators' financial dependence on leadership, and incentivizing more transparency, more participation in lawmaking, particularly in the legislative committees. You can find an overview, a two-pager, that you can print out and use of the ballot question on our campaign website. And our campaign website is Stipend Reform, all with no space, stipendreform.com. And if the ballot question is adopted by voters next November, it would significantly reduce leadership's control over legislators' pay and shrink the pay disparities that currently exist in the legislature. It would cut the number and size of the top stipends, which are by far the largest in the country, while increasing the pay for legislators currently making the least, including close to half of all members of the House, state representatives. And at the same time, it would condition the payment of stipends for the leadership and the chairs, would condition their stipends on, first of all, they're doing real work. So no more of these patronage style, no work jobs of the sort that you can see described in the Globe's coverage. And also on their doing it in a transparent and accountable way. We believe that changing the way legislators get paid, opening up the legislative process would fundamentally change the power dynamic in the legislature. It would allow legislators to be more active, independent, and effective in advocating for their constituents and make the legislature as a whole more truly representative. And this would eliminate one of the key factors that has really worked to marginalize many communities, and which has held us back from achieving, important priorities, things like same-day registration, immigrant protections, strong climate legislation, things like the Healthy Youth Act, which has been a priority of Planned Parenthood for more years than I care to think. It would guarantee much more transparency and more accountability than we've been able to achieve within the legislature through rules reforms efforts. Now, the latest where things stand now is that last Wednesday, the Attorney General certified our ballot question, and this was despite some strong opposition from the legislature. So that is really encouraging. And we're now on to the signature gathering phase, where our success is going to largely depend on two things, volunteers and money. We're building a good volunteer team, with the help of Act On and many other groups. But given the tight time frame that we're operating under here, you have 2 months to gather 100,000 signatures, essentially. We're going to need to supplement that with some paid signature gatherers as well, and hence the need for some fundraising. We have polling data. We have done a statewide poll on this ballot question that shows that it gets upwards of 75% of support from voters in the state. So if we can get this ballot question on the ballot, we will win. We just need to get it on the ballot. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who is our campaign manager, and he is going to tell us what we need to do to make that happen and how all of us can pitch in. Brian?
Yep. Thank you, Jonathan. I think before I get into that, I think it's really important. I was just looking around this room and seeing so many people that have done so much already to improve our legislature, to take a moment to realize the hard work everyone has done. So I was particularly, I got stopped by Jay, and I looked down, I saw Corinne, I see Llewellyn, I see a lot of people I've been talking to. To get to this point, it's because a group of people saw something wrong, came up with an idea, talked to other people, got them involved, and a coalition was formed. And then that coalition reached out to more people, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we're on the actual verge of passing legislation that will improve not just the legislature, but the lives of residents, because then the legislature will be more open to working for the residents and not listening to leadership. And that all started with an idea, with a group of people, and it grew and grew and grew. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's important, particularly for PDM, because a lot of people on here have been in this fight for so long, to recognize that. In terms of the campaign. So for those familiar with ballot questions, you'll understand this. For those that aren't, ballot question campaigns are a little unique. A lot of campaigns, you think of election day, you're building towards election day. Ballot question campaigns, you have multiple stages that are massive sprints. We're currently in what would be a massive sprint. Between now and November 19th, we need to collect well over 100,000 raw signatures in order to make sure we hit the threshold to get on the ballot. Like Jonathan said, that's going to come down to both some paid signature gathering and a lot of volunteers doing the work. Right now we're starting to build out this statewide organization. We're getting people every day. I had like 20 new signups yesterday, but we need more. And that's where you come in. We have signature pages in our office now, and we can get those signature pages out to anyone as soon as we can, as soon as they sign up between now and November 19th. And what we need for you to do is, one, collect as many signatures as you can, commit to collecting as many as you can for us. So we're hoping for at least 100 per volunteer. Two, do you know 5 people that can also help collect signatures? Make sure they know about stipendreform.com, and make sure you get me their information. On stipendreform.com, there is a sign-up form that you can tell people where to sign up, and they come into the campaign. We will also be, for the people that are going to the convention, the state convention on Saturday, we're going to have a table where we're going to have all of our signature pages there. Please stop by it to make sure that you come in and get the signature pages and the package that you need. A little later, I'll go into how to collect signatures, but this right now is the main sprint that we're in. So everyone's aware, though, there's another smaller sprint next year. So once we get by this, where we get the 75,000 raw signatures, there's a time frame where the legislature can act. If they do not act, there's a second round of signatures that's smaller, but an even more condensed time frame. So I think that's about 18,000 signatures, roughly, over about 4 weeks. So that'll be the second sprint on the ballot question campaign. The final sprint will be the actual campaigning for the election. So everything we're doing right now in building out the statewide organization will benefit what we need to do next year. But in addition to that, it will also benefit other legislative reform actions. Because as you know, the more reach you have and the bigger coalition you have, the more it's able to be turned into other actions as well. So what we're really hoping is what we build this year is going to sustain over the long haul and help other initiatives as well get passed. Scotia, do you want to get into the forum side of it now?
Yeah, awesome.
Alright.
So I've got a couple of questions for our panelists. Thank you to Brian and John for sketching the issue. So maybe we can get a little bit into the history. John, you're a former state representative. You served in the legislature for many years. And you also saw a dramatic expansion in the number of stipends. So when you first joined I did the math. There were 62 positions in the House that had a leadership stipend, and by the time you left, there was 107. So almost double, and we're now up to 109. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact that that had on the culture in the building?
Yeah, I'll share some of my thoughts, and then Jay may want to talk about it. He was in the House for a number of years before I was there, and probably has even more perspective on the change. I think sort of breaking down a little bit those numbers that you just mentioned, of that, 109 stipends that are now there in the House among 160 members. I think 95 of them roughly are Democrats. So 95 of the roughly 130 or so Democrats are receiving extra pay, as a result of their deference to the speaker, and that's more than half the legislature. So that's enough people to pass whatever you want. So just in raw terms, I think it's important for people to recognize what we're talking about here, and it's so different from other legislatures around the country, and so different from Congress. I mean, in Congress, in the House, the only people who receive any extra money beyond the salary that every representative receives are the Speaker and the Majority Leader, and perhaps the Minority Leader, but it's no more than three. So just compare that with, and that's out of 435 members. So we have this outlier system of compensation that essentially puts large numbers, a majority of members of the majority party on the payroll of the legislative leadership, and that inevitably impacts the way legislators behave. And I saw when I came into the legislature in 2009, there were still a number of legislators who had the courage, and I think they had the habit. They had been in the legislature for a while of speaking up. They spoke up on the floor. They spoke up in caucus. They went to the press when they had issues that they cared about, even if they were not speaking exactly along the same lines as the leadership. And that those people left. I'm thinking of people like Marty Walsh is a good example. John Quinn, on the left, people like Steve D'Amico and Matt Patrick. It just in the first few years that I was there, those voices basically disappeared. And I think, unfortunately, what you have in the legislature now is people who, I think they come into the job and the building intending to be active, engaged. That's really, I think, in almost all cases, why they're there. But they very quickly acculturate to the expectation that they will listen, that they will be quiet, that they will do whatever effort that they want to make to push things quietly behind closed doors, never publicly contradict, and never vote against leadership's wishes. And I think there's some data that's just been going around about the current session that shows that 90% of the Democrats in the House have voted 100% of the time with the leadership. So this culture of follow the leader has become so dominant, and there's really very little institutional memory now of what it was like when things were otherwise. But I don't know, Jay, do you want to add on to that?
Well, I think you've largely laid out the case perfectly. Just a couple of very quick comments. One is, if this extra pay were producing great results, we'd be having a different conversation. But we are last in the nation in terms of effectiveness, transparency, and a whole other range of metrics that are applied to state legislatures. So we're throwing away public money to reward people for their loyalty to the, I know the term leadership is used, but I know a little bit about leadership, and we're not getting a lot of leadership. We're getting a lot of domination. So the power structure is such that it is in your interest as a newly elected rep to learn to go along to get along. All the systems are designed for that, and we are trying to disrupt that, and we need to disrupt that, both because it undermines the will and the energy and the spirit of people who get elected, but also because we're just not getting a return in terms of good, effective legislation. And in fact, I think every single initiative that will be on the ballot this year, and there are many that will not make it to the ballot, but every single one of those that's filed is an indictment of the legislature, because all of those issues should have been debated and decided by our elected representatives. And that's not the way the system works. The other thing I just want to put on the table to be really clear about is that this is a bipartisan effort. That John Lippert, who's on this call, is signature number 1 on the petition. Signature number 2 is Jennifer Nassour, who's the finance chair of the Republican State Committee and the former chair of the Republican Committee. And one of the other signatories is Amy Carnival, who is the current chair of the Republican Committee. So this is a bipartisan effort reflecting the fact that it's a bipartisan problem, because the Republican minority leaders are able to dole out these stipends as well. And of the 109 people who are, I think the 109 is just the Democrats. Is that right, Jonathan? Or is that everybody?
The Republicans too, for 14 Republicans out of a caucus of 25. So a majority there too.
So that tells you both the problem is bipartisan and our attempt to address is bipartisan. And I think that's, especially in this day and age, that's really exciting. Not the problem, but the fact that we're working across the aisle to fix it.
Yeah, wonderful. It looks like we have an audience member that wanted to add something. Paul, would you like to go?
Oh, okay, there we go. Hi, I'm a former rep, and I served with Jay and Jonathan. I was there elected to 3 terms between 2013 and 2017 when I left to become mayor of Attleboro. Now I'm sheriff. But I want to tell folks a anecdotal story, which kind of makes the points that are being made. When I was a freshman rep, I was asked to vote on the gas tax, to raise the gas tax. And I voted against raising the gas tax because for 2 reasons. I thought it was regressive. And I also said in a debate that I wouldn't support raising the gas tax. And I know we need the revenues, but I had my progressive reasons for that. But what was interesting, though, was for those of us freshman reps in 2013 who voted against the gas tax, at the start of the next term in January 2015, the reps who voted against it, the freshman reps, we did not become vice chairs of any committees. And all of the freshman reps who voted for the gas tax, they became vice chairs of different committees. So that's that was my introduction to the pay to play type of situation that we're faced with. But yeah, I broke with that and voted against it, and I was hurt for it. I wasn't afforded a vice chair spot. But like I said, there was 100% correlation between the people who voted against it and the people who did not get a vice chair and the people who did. So anyway, I just want to share that little anecdote with folks, and yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Paul. I think that one question that comes up for many people on this call, and I appreciate Brian kind of calling out the fact that a lot of us have put in a lot of effort. So posing the question to Jonathan and Brian, and if other folks want to chime in, can you tell us a little bit about what sets this question apart from other efforts to reform the legislature in the past?
I'll again offer my thoughts, and then Brian and Jay can jump in. I think first of all, this is the first time that we've tried to use a ballot question to address one of the core reasons that we have this dysfunction in the legislature. And as we've been talking about, I mean, the stipend system is itself a source of dysfunction, but it also provides us an opportunity to, by structuring the stipend system the right way and conditioning it on the transparency and accountability that we want to see the legislature act with, we can actually get to some of the core problems with the way the legislature operates that it hasn't been possible to get at from within the legislature through rules reform. So I think that's what sets this apart in my mind. I don't know, Jay or Brian?
Jay, did you want to
go? Brian, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I think the one major thing that as a ballot question and as the fact that it is directly addressing a direct tool that allows the speaker and Senate president to keep control of it, taking it so direct and so clear, I think that is going to have a massive effect over the long term. Whereas other initiatives, because some of them you have to do rules changes through the legislature, like Jonathan's saying, it's a little harder, but we're going directly to the voters, right? And the voters get to decide on this one. And it is a very clear rule, a law that we are changing. So the directness for me is really important on this.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking from an organization that has done a lot of work on rules changes, this year's victory notwithstanding, I hear you on that one. And that actually brings me to a question that I had for Brian, which is, you've got a pretty impressive resume on this sort of stuff, with a variety of campaigns. Notably, you had your time with the state party. So we can imagine that taking on this job would have its own set of risks and challenges. Do you want to let us know a little bit what drew you to this ballot question specifically and this year specifically?
Well, first, I like making good trouble in general. So most of my clients have been people that are willing to make the good trouble. What drew me to this? So I got involved in politics almost 20 years ago. Was at the Mass Dems, did a bunch of other things, went to law school, and it became very clear that I have my own ideological wants in a candidate. But in order to get those, there are structural things that need to change. So it doesn't matter what the ideology is that I'm pushing for if the structure underneath doesn't allow for the changes that I want to occur. So I'm very proud of in my travels. I was one of the first hires at a nonprofit that was aimed, it's now national and has about 40 to 50 staffers, aimed at getting a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. I also recently was involved in the effort to get ranked choice voting in the Boston municipals. So I'm really drawn to these structural changes because I think that's the only way we can get the actual long-term goals that we want to get to. Similarly, I'm just drawn in general to representation. So I tend to go with candidates because I think that is another structural issue, making sure that our legislature, our government is actually representative of the people that it serves. So that's my main draw in general when I'm working on a campaign. In terms of this, I think this one again is so direct and clear for me. This is like an easy, yes, we need to do this. As soon as I heard about it, I think, and that's the conversation I've had with people, like, trying to explain it. One person said, who's against this? And I said, maybe the Senate President and Speaker. And they went, oh, that's good, I'm in. They just very clearly, once they hear what the issue is, they go, oh yeah, of course. And it doesn't matter, it cross-partisan nature of it. I believe in that. That's what I fight for. I don't work in this field to, unfortunately, make money. I work in this field to make a difference, as many people here do. So.
Great, thank you. Well, we're lucky to have you. So I have another question that I think might be on some of our minds, which is that although it's the first time that this group has gone to the ballot, we have seen a recent question focused on legislative accountability that went all the way to the state ballot. And of course, I'm referring to question 1 for a legislative audit. And so I can imagine that some folks might be thinking, well, we just won a fantastic, resounding victory, asking for more accountability from the legislature with an audit, and they've managed to delay its implementation now, well more than 8 months past when the law has been entered into effect. So some folks, I can imagine, might be concerned that the same thing might happen with our question. What would either of you guys say to that?
Well,
Very good.
I'll go ahead, Brian. But I think Brian sort of touched on this a little bit about sort of the directness of this initiative. I mean, this this is an initiative petition for a law changing the the terms and conditions under which legislators get paid extra money. Who gets paid, when they get paid, and under what conditions they get paid. And if passed by the voters, it will be effective in January of 2027. And that will determine the payout of public funds. This is not something that the legislature can evade. It's not something that they can negotiate on once it takes effect. It actually isn't even directed to them. It's directed to those who are responsible for the disbursement of public funds. So the only thing the legislature can do to, I don't want to say evade or undermine, because they can't really evade it. The only thing they can do is repeal it or outright change it through another law. And that's different than the situation we have now with the auditor's question, where they're essentially just delaying, avoiding raising questions, not legitimate ones in my view. And ultimately, I hope it's going to get resolved, I think, in the courts in a way that will make the will of the people in passing question one have effect. But this question is different in that it goes, it's directly implementable. It directly changes the disbursement of these funds. There's nothing at the end of the day to stop the legislature from passing another law or changing this law, but they would have to do that. I mean, it would have to be a bald-faced repudiation of the will of the voters. And I would just sort of add to that, I think we also need to, assuming we go forward with this, and I very much believe we will, into next spring, next summer, as Brian was saying, there are going to be campaigns going on up and down the ballot where people are going to need to, candidates are going to need to take a position on this. And I think in that sense, it's going to have a political potency both during that period and then once it's passed, that's somewhat different. So that's my view on it.
I agree completely. I think there are particular things with other initiatives that don't exist in this one. Again, this is so direct. This is changing a specific law to do a specific thing. It will be very hard. It would be so blatant that I can't even fathom how they would accomplish it, essentially. They would have to change the law. They would have to take a vote to say this law is not going to be implemented. And then they would be public on taking a vote on it, as Jonathan just said. So I fully agree with what Jonathan said.
Yeah, I guess another comfort on that one is it's got a hard deadline considering they probably want to be paid in January 2027. So that would kind of come up really quick, and they're not famously great at passing laws in January at the beginning of a session. So
And the way we're reforming it as well will be beneficial to some as well, right?
yeah.
So they're going to have the people that are going to benefit from this vote to repeal it. The logistics there are much more difficult.
Good, very good point, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if we mentioned that yet. A lot of the House members would see a boost in pay, actually, which is a great one if you end up talking to your legislator about it. I think we have time for one more question. I imagine that there's some folks here that, might be ready to jump and collect signatures right away. I'm wondering, Brian, if you can kind of walk us through what that would look like if folks sign up to volunteer with LEAP.
Yeah, sure. So before I get into show, I'm going to share my screen in a minute, show quickly the website where you can sign up and get some information. And then I'll walk you through what the packet we give out is as well. But before that, when you're out collecting signatures, so I'm going to go into the actual act of it, but think through your people carry the clipboard with you when you go to the store or when you go to a PTA meeting or you go to see your family. You'll be surprised how many signatures you're going to be able to pick up just in normal life. Other things that are very good are go to high traffic areas to collect signatures. So go to stores. You're allowed to collect at a store, and we actually give you a letter that lays out exactly what stores are allowed to do. Think through waste transfer stations on big like waste days. So like Needham, for example, has a big Saturday morning. Everyone goes there in the morning. So you have 250 people lined up, and you can get 250 people, 250 signatures in like an hour. It doesn't take a lot of time if you think through where are the places that people are going to be. As for how to collect signatures, so I'm just going to share my screen. First, this is the stipendreform.com. And at the top, you can see there's a signature gatherer toolkit. Here you can download the things I'm about to go over, which is the do's and don'ts on signature gathering, an FAQ sheet, a one-pager that tells you about our initiative, and then you have a FAQ on shopping collecting at shopping centers that the Secretary of State puts out. And then there's also a signature collection reporting form as well, where after you collect, you can let us know how many you collected, whether you need more papers, the whole 9 yards. So please visit stipendreform.com. Also on the front page of stipendreform.com, there is a sign up here. If you sign up, you will hear from me very quickly. So please, if you're interested in collecting or you know other people that are interested in collecting, please have them sign up on stipendreform.com. As for the packet we give out, if you, Scotia, can you see my screen? I just want to make sure I didn't get winded out. Good. This is the actual signature, the petition that we actually need to get signed. So on one page of it is a summary. It is very important that you do not put any marks anywhere in the summary. If you do so, the whole paper could be thrown out. Also on the front page is phone number and an address that you can send the papers back to. This is my number, it comes directly to me. So if you have questions, please call me. On the back side is where you can collect signatures. So there's 15 spots. We're asking that you only collect about 5 signatures per page. All you have to do is make sure that people are a voter. They print and sign their name. Make sure you say print and sign so that the town clerk can read it in the signature section. And then their voting address, but just the street, the number, and the apartment. They don't need the whole city, and you do not need ward and precinct. So it's just print, sign their voting address, and adjust their street, number, name, and apartment. That's all we need. If they're a voter, the town clerk will make sure that they're registered, they're checked off as supporting. The only place you as a canvasser, we're asking you to write is in this city or town box. There's nowhere else we want any other marks on the sheet. Because again, there is a rule, when we'll go over that in the do's and don'ts, that the Secretary of State could disqualify sheets if there's stray marks on the sheets. So when people come up to you, you're going to say, could you sign my paper? You're going to ask what town they live in. Every page needs to be dedicated to a specific town because we have city or town, because we have to turn those into the clerk for those city or towns. So if someone comes up and says, I'm registered in Boston, this is now a Boston sheet. If someone comes up from a different city or town, start a new sheet for that person. So they can sign here, Boston. The next person comes up and wants to sign. Where are you registered to vote? I'm registered to vote in Malden. Okay, then you go and create a new sheet, and that's your Malden sheet. If someone signs a Boston sheet and they're a Malden person, don't cross it out. Don't do anything. We'll just lose that signature and that's it. But try your best to make sure that you have just one city or town on one sheet. And if you're unsure, for example, sometimes people are unsure if Dorchester and Boston are different places. That happens sometimes. Just start a new sheet and that will be the Dorchester sheet. And then just pass that in and we'll know and we'll pass it into the right place. We're also going to give this one pager that we talked about that goes over the initiative. We talked a lot about the information here, but this will be in your packet. There'll be information at the bottom, how to contact us. And then we give this do's and don'ts page. So let me move the camera out of the way so I can see. This tells you everything that you need to know. So what do you do? 1, invite as many people as you know to collect signatures with you. The more people that can collect, the better. 2, remember that the only valid signatures are voters. 3, remember that each sheet needs to be dedicated to a town or a city, and make sure you keep them separate. 4, do make sure that you keep the signature sheets clean. No stray marks, no coffee stains, no, what sometimes people do is they start tapping on the sheet with their pen just as like a habit. Don't do that. That could be bad. Don't let people cross out, or like if the pen doesn't work, don't let them scribble to get it going on the sheet. If that happens, start a new sheet. 5, make sure that you can read the signatures, right? Make sure you work in an area that you're in. So if you're at a store, talk to everyone. Don't just stand back. Have materials with you and organize on a clipboard. You can return your completed sheets. Again, the information's on the paper itself, but here's more information how to reach out to me and let me know how many you collected. What you don't do, be careful, don't print signature pages yourself. The reason for that is if they're not printed correctly, they could be disqualified by the Secretary of State. And we have plenty of sheets. We have 20,000 sheets, and we can get them out to whoever needs them. 1, don't worry about speaking to the press. If you want to just pass it off to us, let us know, and just let us know that tell the press to reach out to that email address. Another one, remember that if you have a sheet that has, let's say you have 10 signatures on it, and accidentally 3 of them are Malden and 7 of them are Boston. If you're turning them in, make sure you turn it into the Boston Town City Clerk, because you're more likely to get more signatures that way. Avoid squiggles, highlighting, underlines. Avoid all that as best you can, because again, that could potentially disqualify. And the next page will show you some examples of that. So these are examples of things that could disqualify a sheet that you want to avoid. If someone crosses out a name, that's bad. We don't want to do that. If you see someone do that, just start a new sheet immediately. That's why we don't want to use up all the lines on a sheet. We want to stick to about 5 per page. These squiggles at the bottom when the pens don't work, avoid that. Avoid these lines or trying to highlight things in the summary. If like you think that's the best way to get people to pay attention to it, that will immediately disqualify the entire sheet, because we can't point to specific things in the summary. We need to allow voters to find it themselves. And then you want to avoid marks on the page as well. And then the final thing we give out is the actual memo from the Secretary of the Commonwealth on where you can collect. So it tells you what shopping centers can or cannot do. So for example, at a store, you are allowed to collect outside of a store. It's a constitutional right. You are not allowed to interfere with the business of the store. So the store has the ability to ask you to move a little bit to be good for the customers, but they don't have the ability to tell you you cannot collect there. That happens, reach out to us. Don't fight it in the moment, just reach out through the contact to us and we can figure it out. So that is the packet that we give out to everybody. It's pretty self-explanatory when you go through it. I'm happy if anyone has any questions to go over what the questions are.
Great.
Yes, correct, Norman.
Well, it looks
There's a box on the front as well. You write the name into the city as well.
awesome. Can someone send that link in the chat one more time? The stipend reform chat. The link, sorry. And then we're almost to the hour, so I think we're gonna close here. If you have any additional questions, I'm sure you can reach out to some of the panelists. And I'm gonna pass it off to Kathleen to close us out. And thank you all for having us today and for joining us.
This was superb. I've been to I think all the forums, and I can't think of one that was more useful and better. And I thank you all. I congratulate you all for being so succinct and so incredibly informative. Brian, I think you should be training everybody who's doing anything with a ballot question that we support, like the rent stabilization and everything else. Those tips are useful for any kind of ballot question that anybody's using. Thanks a lot. This will be up on our site, on the forums page on the Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts site, which we can stick in the chat. I hope John Lippett's still here and can do that. If not, you'll find it if you just Google Progressive Dems of Mass. In the meantime, we're also going to try to put into the chat into the forums page the links that you've been giving us in the chat itself. And thank you, Scotia, for doing such a brilliant job of keeping this going and asking the right questions. And thank you, Brian. Thank you, John. John is the father in some ways of this stipend reform, and we'd love to see his child make it all the way to law. Thanks a lot, and all of you have a wonderful day in spite of all the bad news that we're dealing with day in and day out. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.